Welcome everyone for today's studies. Spiritism Inspiring Lives. All of those who may be reaching us and also joining us through our YouTube, Facebook channel, and also all of those who are gathering through Web Rádio Fraternidade. May you all feel welcome in this unique and special moment of reflections about spirituality. And for us to start our meeting, I would kindly invite everyone for us to harmonize ourselves. For those who would choose to close your physical eyes, feel free to do so. As we start to calm our minds, our hearts, perceiving the feelings of goodness that already are extended to all of us by the Enlightened Spirits. As we may start this meeting, expressing our gratitude for our lives, for all the experiences that the universe presents to us, aiming always our own evolution, our gratitude for Spiritism in our pathway, in our journey, our gratitude for all of us to be together in this unique moment, ourselves and all of those in the Spirit who are also with us, receiving the blessings by the enlightened beings, and even all of those who are at home also be blessed with these feelings of brotherhood, fraternity. And as we are united as children of God, brothers and sisters in humanity, we start this meeting today. So be it. So once more, may you all feel welcome. And today, as we carry on our English study, Spiritism Inspiring Lives, we have a very important theme: never give up. And in order to facilitate it for us, we have the presence of our dear friend, Tania Stevanin. For those who don't know her, we will do a very brief presentation. Tania Stevanin is PhD in microbiology, graduate diploma in psychology, co-founder of Sheffield Spiritist Group in the UK. Is a national, international Spiritist speaker. Tania, feel very welcome, and we in the Spiritist Psychological Society really welcome you in a very warm way, and it will be good to carry on with you in this couple of minutes to reflect about this important theme in our existences. So in that way, we pass it on to you. Hand it over.
Thank you very much, Evanisi, and thank you for the invitation to give this presentation. I'll just share something personal to begin with, because when I was invited to give this presentation, I was going through a very difficult time in my life, health-wise, and it made me reflect on the experiences I was going through. We talk about never giving up, and it made me ask myself, what was it that I was not giving up? What does this expression mean? What it meant to me at the time and at different times of my life. And it kind of guided my presentation, because usually when we hear an expression like this, we see it in a very positive way, as we should, because not giving up means fighting for what we believe, having faith in ourselves, in others. But is there a downside to it? And this is the question that came to my mind at the time, because there are many things we can give up on or not give up on. There are many areas in our lives where we have to make choices. So if I could have the next slide, please. The first question that came to my mind was what? What does it mean? What am I giving up or not giving up? What am I fighting for? What should we fight for? And this is a very important question that we should always ask ourselves at times of choice, because there are things that we should continue to struggle to achieve, work towards achieving, and things that maybe we need to think a bit more about. So if I could have the next slide, please. So first of all, I'll start with the negatives first, because I always like to end in a positive note. This is part of my training as a psychotherapist as well. There is a negative side to not giving up. I put two mentions there: Crimea, Sudan. Sudan is a very, very recent one. This is about personal choices, but personal choices that involves nations. So I'll stay with Sudan, the example of Sudan at the moment, which has been very much on our news here in Brazil, and I assume also internationally, because what we realize now more than ever, and there has been a lot of debate about this regarding the media, social networks, and politics, economics, is that our world is not really that big. It used to be. People used to be born in a particular village and pretty much stay in that village all their lives. And so did their children and grandchildren. And if there was a war somewhere, sometimes they would not even notice that there was a war somewhere. If it was in a different country or in a very different area of the country, unless one of their children were asked to join the war, the villagers might never know that there was something happening that was world changing. And things were happening, but they were very isolated in a way. And that was good in many ways. There was the negative side, because many of the times when there were positive changes, they didn't benefit, or it took a long time for them to benefit from those changes as well. However, nowadays, we realize that our world has become very small because we are very much interconnected. The way I often visualize it, it's like a spider web where the many threads connect all of us all over the world. There are certain spiritual philosophies, including Spiritism, that mentions that we are interconnected through our energies, energy strands that connects us. So my actions reverberates and affects other people. But there are times in which one individual or a couple of individuals' actions can affect the whole world. And Sudan is an interesting example, because I don't know if you are familiar with the background. I'm not that familiar, so I'll just mention what I know about it. There was a dictator, and there were two main military factions that were rivals, and they joined forces to down the dictator. So for a period of time, they decided to put aside their differences to fight a common enemy. And they succeeded. The idea, the proposal at the time was then to work towards civilian rule through a democratic system. However, not that long after they were able to oust the dictator, their differences resurfaced and they started fighting. Usually, if we think about it in a very literal way, it involves mostly two strongmen, two generals, who hold the loyalty of a number of men, mostly. I'm not saying that there aren't women involved as well, but mostly men, armed with resources to even more powerful weapons that are fighting each other. But they're not just punching each other on the face. They're fighting each other in a way that involves the whole country. And now there are hundreds of thousands of people trying to escape the horror that these two very strong personality egos have created. So, what should they do? One of them will have to make the choice to let go, to not to continue the fight, to give up. Often it involves both sides giving up something. So if even one of them starts working towards the principle, within the principle of never give up, is that going to be a positive? Probably not even to that individual. Even the short-term gains will be very negligible compared to the losses that they will have to endure. So there are times in which giving up is better than not giving up. I was giving a talk a few years ago now when the conflict in Syria was very much on the news. And rest assured, I will move on to the positives very soon. And what came to my mind after watching an interview with the wife of the president of Syria was that this was a relatively young woman with two relatively young children who knew very well that if her husband gave in to the rebels, there was a horrible war going on. But what I saw was not the wife of the president, not the wife of the man who was insisting on a war, on a power that was causing insufferable pain to thousands, maybe millions of people. I saw a mother who knew very well that the moment he gave up the struggle for that power, he probably would lose his life, and there was a good chance that her children would lose their lives. So that was a woman that was not prepared to give up. And I felt very sad, very sorry, because I could see the human side of that struggle, the individual side of that struggle, and the reasons why, as a mother, as a wife, that woman was not going to stand on international television and say, my husband is wrong. I will advise him to give up power, because there were other forces driving her decision. So that's the negative side of the principle of giving up or not giving up. So if I could have the next slide, please. Now I'm going to spend the rest of the talk talking about the positive side of it and bring it down to our level, to the more individual level, because the reality is the world will change when enough of us have changed. Until enough of us have changed the core within ourselves, our ability to make more positive, healthier choices that are not just based on our own ego, on our own personal needs, but can understand and connect with other people's needs, the world is not going to change. But if we do that, then it's not going to take that long for the world to change. So each one of us has a role to play, and that's when the positive side of not giving up comes into play and becomes essential. I think this image is a very telling one, because how many times, almost on a daily basis, if we stop and think about it, we face struggles, we face difficulties, we face challenges and choices that makes us feel like we have the world upon our shoulders. It feels heavy. It feels almost unbearable. It feels like at any minute we are going to lose our strength and be crushed by that weight. And it is an uphill struggle. We use this expression so often. It's an uphill struggle. But we can make it easier for ourselves. And I will talk about it a bit later. But just using a couple of examples of when not giving up is a benefit, not just for the individual, for us individually, but for others as well. And I mention here the prodigal son's father. We talk a lot about the prodigal son parable, the son who wasted the father's resources, his inheritance, and then in a sparkle of humility went back. And then the father welcomed him with open arms in great delight. And I think anyone who is a mother or a father or has someone they love who had been in their care, in their responsibility, like adopted, like siblings. Even I have 2 adopted siblings in my family who came in a bit later in our lives, and I was already an adult, so I'm a bit like a mother figure to them. And the delight when something good happens to them is very great, and the sorrow that we feel when we see them making the wrong choices or making choices that are likely to cause them harm or pain, and we want them always to be happy. And then there's the other son who in the parable shows the other side of the argument, the selfish side, because he's jealous. He's jealous of his brother. He's jealous of the love that his brother shows, that his father shows his wayward brother. When his brother is welcome and the father throws a party for the brother, he begrudges that because he probably sees the resources, the foods that's going to be in his mind wasted on someone who's not worthy as his, because his brother got his half of the inheritance. Everything else that's left in his mind is his. Why should his father be wasting it on someone who didn't deserve it, who was ungrateful, who was wasteful? And the father explains the reasons why he was lost. His brother was lost and now he's being found again. And that shows that his father, this father, never gave up on that son, was always hoping for that son's return. What he did was something very brave that few of us are strong enough to do. He gave that son the opportunity to find out for himself where his weaknesses were, where the areas he still needed to work on were, rather than try to fix it for him or prohibit him from leaving because he knew it was going to end up in disaster. It could have ended up much worse. The son could have died of starvation in a foreign country and never have the chance to return home. So when the son returns home, he's delighted that his son made it back because he would never give up on that son. And that's what God does to us. God never, ever gives up on us to the point that he created a whole universe for us and eternity for us. Because God had a sense that if God wanted us to share in the responsibility for getting it right, we would need to also face the consequences when we got it wrong. But God didn't want us to be lost. God wanted us to be saved, like the prodigal son's father wanted. So God gave us the opportunity to make our mistakes, but also provided us with the route back through the process of reincarnation. So we can make a mistake, learn from that mistake, and come back. But we don't need to reincarnate to start the process of learning to make better choices in our lives. So I'm going to introduce now some tools that I used a lot and other therapists use as well to help people in that thinking process, because the main question when deciding which route do we take, do we stop trying or do we continue to try, what does never giving up really means and how do we make that choice, is to think about it. So I think I've got the next slide there already. So one of the things that we do, it's a pros and cons list, for example. What are the advantages? What do I gain? What do I lose if I let things be the same or if I make a change? So first of all, we need to know what we are fighting for. What is it that we're working towards? There is something called smart goal setting, and everybody, I think, understands the concept of goals. Goals are objectives, things we want to achieve. I want to go from London to Sheffield. That's my goal. And then I have to identify the steps towards it. And SMART goal is about setting, you need to know exactly what the objective is. Then you need to know how long it might take. Do I want to be in Sheffield by tomorrow, or in the next couple of hours, or next week? So I need to know by when I want to achieve that goal. I need to identify, is there anyone that can help me achieving this goal? Am I going by train or bus? Am I flying to Sheffield? So, and each choice has positives and negatives. I used to ask, and I'll talk about more about my professional experiences while I was working in Sheffield, but I worked with people with substance misuse problems, mostly alcoholics. And often people knew very well what was wrong, what they were losing, the problem they had. But I often used to ask them, what does it give you? What is good about it? And more often than not, the answer would be nothing. Nothing is good about it, because they wanted to give up drinking. And they wanted that because that problem was killing them, destroying their relationships, lost their jobs, the lot. So they couldn't think about anything positive. However, if we are not stopping some things because that something is giving us something. There is a level in our minds, in our souls, that's being satisfied by it. There's a need that's being met, even if that need is killing us. I used to ask them, because I said, you need to replace that. You need to fill, once you stop drinking, you need to fill that gap with something. Because the effort necessary to change a habit that has become an addiction, that has become a compulsion, is going to be huge. And we need to find a reason to make it worthwhile. Otherwise, people relapse. It's a fact of life. So we need to know what the advantages of continuing the way it is and the disadvantages. Often when we want to change something or when we are ill, we know the advantages of the change, or we know the disadvantages of continuing, but we need to know the other side of that argument as well. Can I have the next slide, please? So in this one here, it helps us to think about it in a bit more detail and include other things that are important for us as well. Because our choices, they are not going to just affect us. They are going to affect other people. They are going to affect many layers in our lives. So we need to know what things are important to us. Who is important to me? Like the example I was giving before, there was usually a child or a husband or a wife or a mother or a father that were important to that person. Sometimes when they became very isolated, it's your drinking mates. Your drinking mates are important to you. I worked with people who were homeless, and the other homeless people they spent time with became their family, and their well-being was important as well. What things are important to me? It's my house, my personal possessions, the clothes I wear. What activities? What are the things that I like doing that I will be able to do more of? Or things that I should be doing less of? The places. One thing working with people with addiction is that their world becomes very, very small. When we think about the onion metaphor, is a good one, because an onion has many layers. And then the very inner one is us, when we imagine that. And when we suffer from an addiction or from a debilitating illness that stops us from going out, from interacting with other people, during the pandemic, we suddenly realized that we had gone from the outer layers of that onion from one day to the next to the very inner one, where there was only maybe 1 or 2 layers there. And people who lived on their own often found themselves with just the inner layer and struggling with that emotion. And then it became the choice. And in that case, it was, in some cases, a choice between life and death. Do I break the rules, go out, interact with people regardless, or do I stay in my inner layer? And some of the clients I worked with were actively making that choice because they had to choose between going through severe withdrawals on their own or get out and try to access the substance they had been using up to that point. Many people make the choice to access help because they found that the only way for them, the effort to access help and to make the changes became easier during the pandemic. Others developed a problem during the pandemic because they couldn't cope with that isolating environment. What are my feelings, my emotions? What do I want to feel like? I mentioned to you that I was facing some challenges when I was asked to give this presentation, and one of the choices that became very present in my life that made me realize how interesting life can sometimes turn to was the different types of treatment and the consequences of each one of them, and made me think about the people who have to undergo chemotherapy, for example. It was not my case, but it made me realize how different the choices can be sometimes for different people, and see the different prospects in a non-judgmental way. Because we hear that on television when there is a new treatment or some treatment that is very expensive, and you hear the cost. Like I heard treatments that costed hundreds of thousands of pounds that would only increase the prospect of one's life by a few months. And that individual and their families fought every single minute of their lives to try to get that treatment, because for them those few months, those few weeks were so precious, so important. And sometimes it's not people that you would necessarily think would gain much from all that effort, from all that pain, because a lot of the times those treatments are very painful. They don't prolong happiness, they prolong the pain, but the physical pain at least. But they were not giving up on that physical life because they had small children that they wanted to see a few months of their lives a bit more than they would if they discarnated. But sometimes it was people of a certain age that a younger generation might think, you've already lived enough. Why not just let go? They were not prepared to let go. They were prepared to fight to not let go. And that's a right they have. We should not judge who deserves the treatment, who deserves the resources or not. It should be something that could be offered to everyone. On the other side of it, there were people who decided to not undergo, not continue treatment because they didn't want to spend the few months or weeks that they had feeling ill all the time. They wanted to spend that time with what they consider to be more quality of life, to be able to enjoy, to build up positive memories, happy memories for themselves and others. Those of us who believe in the life after the physical death, believe and understand that we continue to be ourselves and to retain the memory of the things we've done, the choices we made, the consequences, the benefits, can totally understand that. Some of us who do not have that belief may find that very strange. But these people were not just thinking about themselves, they were thinking about others as well. So, do I fight for the treatment or do I fight for quality of experiences with my loved ones while I can? So, some were not giving up on the extra time that they could possibly gain with their family. Some were not giving up on the quality of the time they could have with their family. Can I have the next slide, please? So in the previous slide, there was a blank square there that I am expanding on this one a bit. Because to make that choice, to decide whether to go one way or another, we need to understand ourselves. We need to understand what we are wanting to get from life. What is it that I'm fighting for? What am I gaining from it? What am I losing? Like in the slides, a couple of slides ago. But also, it's important to here maybe add some of the people that will face the consequences for our choices too. Because when we make a choice, we don't make it in isolation. Knowing where I am today, maybe the next square, one of those boxes, should be entitled as how do I want to feel or be tomorrow? If I continue to go this way, how is it going to affect my life? How is it going to affect the life of the people I care about? How is it going to affect the life of my neighbors? Who else it may affect? So one of the very first slides when I was talking about the negative side, or I called it the negative side of not giving up, when we make a choice that in the grand scheme of things is bad. Is bad because there is a question in the Gospel according to Spiritism about whether to make it public, something wrong done by somebody. And the answer is it depends. It's a matter of numbers. How many people are going to benefit from that exposure, from the exposition of evil? If the only thing that you're going to attain is the humiliation of the person who did wrong, then maybe the best choice is not to say anything, to try to remediate the evil without exposing the evildoer. However, if that evil threatens the well-being, the safety of a number of people, then exposing one person to save many others is not something bad and should be done. So when I was talking about Sudan and the issue with Russia as well at the moment, often one person is talked about, one or two. In Sudan, two generals. The Russian issue is usually Vladimir Putin who is mentioned, because these people, they hold power that affects other people, affects thousands hundreds of thousands of people. In this case, we could pray for those individuals to give up on their efforts to retain power, to gain more power, to get what they want, because their not giving up has destroyed and is destroying the lives of many others. On the other hand, when we talk about doctors in these circumstances, not giving up on their patients to the point where they risk and often lose their lives because they stay put at the hospitals, they fight the system. Journalists that don't give up on telling their story, and I'm not using the word the truth here on purpose, because when we are exposing a story, whether we like it or not, we put a bit of ourselves in it, we put our opinion in it. However, a lot of the times what they are exposing is the truth of that situation, more than what the dictators, the bosses want to show, when the choices they are making are more selfish choices. When we know that something is right and we fight for that to be acknowledged, that's a good fight. And we need to understand who we are to be able to see, to identify how far we are able to go. Because that will force us outside our comfort zone, on the outer layers. It will force us towards the outer layers of that onion, of our personal onion. It will expose us to criticism, it will expose us to others. But when we know that something is true, there is a strength that comes from that makes us stronger, especially if we can ally ourselves with other people that also know what is true. Now, concentrating on the me part, bringing the issue, the topic right back to us individually, I want each of you to ask yourselves, what am I not going to give up on today? What is it that I'm not going to give up on today? And while you're doing that, if I could have the next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about some personal examples from my previous work with the NHS. So I'll just give you some background information. I worked for over 10 years, nearly 11 years, with people struggling with substance misuse. Initially, I worked in a charitable organization. Then I got the job at the NHS. And at the NHS, initially my job was to create links with other organizations in the city, which was absolutely great, because one thing that became very clear to me was that people who have been abusing substances for a very long time, they often come with comorbidities, so mental health problems, physical health problems, social problems, and they become very isolated. So getting them out of that isolation was key a lot of the times to recovery. We offered treatment, medical treatment, but medical treatment only went a very short way towards recovery. The greatest part of recovery was willpower, was social networking, was becoming part of a larger experience. I remember someone who used to drink very, very heavily. He was what we call the binge drinker. Very intelligent man, very capable, articulate, had a son who he absolutely adored, grown-up son. So on a daily basis, on a day-to-day basis, he didn't have anyone dependent on him, which meant when the mood took him and he started drinking, he used to drink spirits. He used to be the kind of person who would easily down 2 bottles of spirits in a day and wake up in the gutter. Literally, he would wake up lying on the floor somewhere outside the house because he would drink so much he wouldn't even make it home once he started. And then he would drink for a few days, a few weeks, and then he would stop for a few days, few weeks, sometimes a month or two. But the issue, which was not helping him to give up on the drinking, was that he, in his words, life is very boring if you're sober. When he was not sober, life was an emotional roller coaster. So, in a way, he was more addicted to the adrenaline, to the risk that he took when he drank, than to the drink itself. And he could not give up on that. But there was another thing that he wouldn't give up on. He would not give up on himself because there was a part of him that knew that he had things in his life worth not giving up on, worth fighting for, like his son, like himself. He knew he was capable of doing so much, and drinking was not going to help him. It was taking that away from him. It had taken that away from him for a very long time. There were other things that he thought drink was providing him with. He was very much into football, and in England at least, and in many other countries, when you go to watch any sports event, there's a bar and lots of people are drinking, and it's part of the culture, and it's part of enjoying, like, having a coffee in the morning for some people is very important. And giving up on that would mean that the day would not have as much fun starting with than having that coffee. And sometimes it's interesting how small the things we need to be happy can be, how trivial they can be. I used to facilitate a support group, and people came and went, and we saw all kinds of people. And one day, this gentleman, he used to come for a few weeks and then disappear, usually when he was on a bender, and then he would come back again when he sobered up. But he kept struggling with that feeling of boredom when he was not drinking. But in the meantime, because he was not giving up on himself, he kept giving himself chances to come off of that life. He got involved with some charitable work, with volunteering, which he was very passionate about. So that gave him that extra strength. And one day he disappeared completely. For months, I never saw him. He never came back to the organization I work, never came back to the groups, which usually, more often than not, was a bad sign. But then one day, I was going across town and I bumped into him. And he said to me, he had a big smile on his face and he called me out and we started chatting. And I was terrified. I was not willing to ask him the question. I wanted to know if he was well and if he was not drinking anymore, but I didn't have the courage to ask him the question. We were in a public space and I didn't want to embarrass him. But also, I was having a difficult day and I didn't want that day to be even harder by having bad news about his situation. I was outside work, so I didn't know that it was safe to ask the question, so I didn't. But he volunteered and he said, "You'll be glad to hear that I'm still volunteering, I'm still doing well, and I haven't drunk for," at that time, I think it was over a year. And before I could even ask, because I was going to ask him, how did you manage that? What did it? He volunteered the information. He said, one day the penny dropped and I realized that that thing was not giving me anything. It was lying to me. It pretended to be good to me, but it wasn't. It was just taking things away. this was possible. He made it possible because he never gave up on himself. He never gave up on the hope to sober up and to be the best version of himself, which he had glimpses of when he was sober, and then he lost when he started drinking again. And I saw that many times in my line of work. In my line of work, we used to dread the first few months of the year because it went from the run up to Christmas, which is very hard for a lot of people who abuse substances, because by the time they come to us, they've already lost quite a lot. Their jobs, their families, they are very lonely, they are poorly physically, emotionally. And the run up to Christmas is terrible for them. First of all, because of the ads, all the adverts showing loads of drinking going on. You walk into the supermarket and that's the first thing you see, because they put the booze, the alcohol right there at the front door a lot of the times, encouraging people to buy alcohol because it's associated with being happy, with celebrating this family event. And then there is the loneliness. You're supposed to be happy. You're supposed to be spending time with your family. What if you don't have any family anymore? What if you don't even have a home anymore? So it can be very depressing. In the UK, you add the bad weather, the cold, the dark days, long nights to it. And then January comes and the damage continues because many services close between Christmas and New Year. So people who are used to going to groups, who are used to going to meetings, sometimes they don't have those and they may fall off the bandwagon. And a lot of people end up very poorly and even dying between January and February. However, even though most of the phone calls we used to get about clients were not good news, especially after discharging, if we got a phone call saying someone is on the line or someone is on the line wanting to talk about someone, it sent a shiver down our spine because we knew more often than not that news were not going to be good. However, it also taught me over 10 years working for the NHS, 12 years altogether in this area of work, that the people who did not give them up on themselves, who did not give up on finding a way to maintain their sobriety, to achieve it and maintain it, ended up succeeding. Because at some point they would find that strength, they would find that reason, they would find the right treatment, they would find the right group for them to attend. And I was lucky to facilitate a group that was the knitting group that became quite well known in Sheffield at the time. And that group provided that social interaction that people needed to practice being around other people in a healthy, sober way. And many of them got jobs, started other groups elsewhere, and did very well from that because they didn't give up on themselves, because they carried on. So if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. I put here, faith can help us jump further. And faith, it's not just about faith in this unknown deity or this higher power. The AA uses that expression a lot, higher power, because if we are not believing in ourselves, but we can believe there is a higher power in the universe that can sustain us at times of need, that can bridge the gap between where we are and where we want to be and help us get there, then that often helps us to continue that process. So faith in God or faith in a higher power can be extremely positive when we are facing a struggle that we think, do I give up now or not? There are times, and I mentioned people undergoing chemotherapy And not just cancer patients undergo very damaging types of treatment. There are times in which you're feeling so poorly, you're feeling so ill, and you think your symptoms are so severe and life damaging that you think, is it worth continuing? Because if life is going to be like this from now on, maybe I don't want life anymore. And this is what leads a lot of people to contemplate suicide, because they lost faith in the future. They lost faith that the future can be anything less than excruciating pain, be that physical or emotional. So if we can find that little ray of sunshine, that little light at the end of the tunnel. I used to tell my clients when they were going through very tough times, most of my clients had mental health problems, depression, anxiety, and and a lot of the people I worked with had contemplated, and many had tried to commit suicide. And I used to tell them, I said, listen, you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel because you are on a bend in the way. The tunnel turns, comes and goes. It's like a zigzag kind of thing, an S-shaped tunnel. It's not a straight tunnel, so you can't see the light. But if you keep going and you go around this bend, eventually you're going to get to the end of the tunnel. The light is going to be there. And while the light is, you can't see the light, what can give you the strength to keep going, to give yourself the chance to get to the end of the tunnel? Because a lot of the times it is like that. This is something that the AA gets as well, one day at a time. And often I had to tell, especially patients at the early stages of treatment, the minute they were discharged from hospital, for example, and they are going home now to the same environment that often led them to start drinking or using in the first place. And I used to say to them, one day is very long. Maybe break it down to 1 minute at a time. If you can stay sober 1 minute at a time, then you get to the end of an hour, 2 hours, and so on until you got through the end of the day. And eventually you get to the 1 day at a time. So we need many different types of faith to be able to be strong enough not to give up on ourselves, on our future. Because be that someone who's trying to stay sober, be that someone who is making the decision to stay married or not. Do I give up, or do I keep going with this marriage? To give up on life? Or talking about multiple incarnations, we must not give up on ourselves, because if we keep going, we will find the end of that tunnel. We are going to find that end point. So that gap becomes narrower if we can build a bridge across it. And we can build a bridge across it by believing that we can continue to go, believing in ourselves. However, it is also important to do a little pros and cons in our mind, because there might be times in our lives in which giving up or changing direction. So it's not about giving up, it's about changing direction. We might believe that something is good for us, that extra slice of cake is good for me, I want it, I'm going to enjoy it. But is it going to affect my diabetes? Then we need to, because our wants and desires and needs crash with each other sometimes. But if we can choose the right one to fight for our spiritual enlightenment, our overall well-being, the well-being of those around us, making a positive contribution to society so that we can live in a nicer world, in a better world. Our children can live in a nicer world, in a better world. Not giving up on making my contribution towards recycling. If we can find the trivial things we can do in a positive way, on a very daily basis, we are going to realize that we become stronger to fight the bigger battles later on when we face the bigger struggle in terms of our lives. Which way do I go? It makes our choice easier because we become wiser in the way we make those choices, less centered in ourselves and understanding ourselves as part of a larger picture as well. And if all fails, then faith in God definitely helps, because at times when we are not sure, then if we can lift our thoughts to reach out the higher intelligences of the universe to give us a helping hand and that extra strength that we need, then we can achieve a lot as well, and we can go further. We can bridge that gap. We can jump across or walk across if necessary, whenever possible. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to say a prayer to finish our presentation today and to finish the activity for today. So those of you who would wish to participate, as Evanise said to begin with, you can close your eyes or just open your mind and tap into this positive energy, the love energy that created the universe. We don't need to give it a name. We are part of it. Every cell, every particle of our bodies vibrate with this love creating energy. And as we are connected with one another through these energies of life, we can say a thank you to the universe, to the love that created everything, for our existences. And we can ask for strength to keep us going when we need to keep fighting for something that is true, that is useful, that is healthy, that's important for us. And give us the wisdom to know when something may not be good for us, so that we can change direction and find our way to the light, to the love that gives us comfort, to make us stronger, wiser. And we thank that love and those who are the intermediary between us and the great love, for the inspiration that we've received today and will receive tomorrow to continue our existences. God bless you all. God bless us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for facilitating this team and the reflections for all of us. Our immense gratitude, Tania, to you. And as we're coming to the end, also saying thank you for all of those who have been with us, and perhaps those who later on will join these reflections as the video will be available in our YouTube or Facebook. For you, Tania, and your family, we do wish you much peace to you all, and hope we have other opportunities that we can come together in terms of reflecting about ourselves and about life experiences. Thank you very much indeed. All the best. Bye-bye. See you.
Bye.